The Admiral's daughter had been screaming every night for 6 days straight, and no one in the pediatric wing knew why. The hospital staff rotated shifts just to avoid her room. But when the night nurse finally cut open her pillow during another round of hysterical sobbing, what tumbled out onto the sterile white sheets made her blood run cold. And what happened next would flip this entire hospital upside down. The girl had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with her mother, a composed woman in her early 40s who wore sunglasses indoors and spoke in clipped, careful sentences. The intake nurse had noted the bruising on the child's arms, the way she flinched when anyone moved too quickly, the hollow look in her eyes that didn't belong on a 7-year-old. Standard protocol kicked in. The attending physician ordered a full workup. The mother was cooperative, almost too cooperative, answering every question with rehearsed precision. She explained that her daughter had been having night terrors since her father deployed 6 months ago. Nothing unusual for a military family. The doctor had noted in his chart, stress-related anxiety. Recommend counseling and observation. But the screaming started that first night, and it wasn't the kind that came from bad dreams. It was raw, primal, the sound of someone trying to claw their way out of their own skin. The nurses tried everything. Warm milk, breathing exercises. They brought in a child psychologist who sat with the girl for an hour, but she wouldn't speak, wouldn't even look up from where she sat, clutching that pillow like it was the only thing tethering her to earth. The mother watched in the doorway, her face unreadable, and when the psychologist suggested separating them for observation, she simply nodded and left without saying goodbye. That's when the whispers started among the staff. The overnight nurses began trading theories during shift changes. Some thought it was trauma from abuse. Others suspected the mother had Munchausen by proxy, that she was somehow orchestrating this whole performance for attention. The senior charge nurse, a woman who'd worked pediatrics for 23 years and thought she'd seen everything, dismissed them all. She'd dealt with military families before, knew how deployment stress could fracture even the strongest kids. Give it time, she said. The girl just needed to feel safe. But time only made it worse. By day 4, the screaming had evolved into something more disturbing. The girl would wake up clawing at her pillowcase, tearing at the fabric with her small fingers until her nails bled. The nurses had to restrain her twice to keep her from hurting herself. They switched out her pillow 3 times, thinking maybe the material was irritating her skin or triggering some sensory issue. Nothing worked. She calmed down during the day, barely speaking but functional enough to eat and color in the activity books they brought her. Then night would fall, and the cycle would start again. The attending physician was getting pressure from hospital administration. The girl was taking up resources, disturbing other patients, and they still had no diagnosis beyond anxiety and possible PTSD. He ordered sedatives. Light doses at first, then stronger ones when those failed to keep her under. But even drugged, she'd wake up screaming, fighting through the medication with a desperation that didn't make sense for simple nightmares. One of the younger nurses mentioned calling Child Protective Services, but the senior staff shut that down fast. The mother had been investigated already, they said, came back clean. And besides, she was barely even visiting anymore, had checked into a hotel across the street, and only appeared during designated visiting hours, sitting quietly in the corner while her daughter suffered. That's when Sarah Chun took over the case. She was new to the pediatric wing, a transfer from the ER, who'd specifically requested night shifts because she couldn't sleep anyway and figured she might as well get paid for her insomnia. The other nurses had warned her about room 304, told her to bring earplugs and prepare for a long night. But Sarah had a different approach. She'd spent 3 years working trauma cases in downtown emergency rooms, had learned to read what people weren't saying to spot the details everyone else missed because they were too busy treating symptoms instead of searching for sources. She started her first night by doing something none of the other nurses had bothered with. She sat on the floor next to the girl's bed, not saying anything, not touching her, just existing in the same space. The girl watched her with those hollow eyes, clutching the pillow to her chest. Sarah noticed how she held it, not like a comfort object, like a shield, like she was protecting it instead of the other way around. When visiting hours ended and the mother left, Sarah watched how the girl's entire body relaxed, how her breathing steadied, how her grip on the pillow tightened. The screaming started at 2:47 a.m., right on schedule. But this time, Sarah was ready. She moved quickly to the bedside, not to restrain or sedate, but to observe. The girl wasn't looking at the ceiling or the walls. She was looking down at the pillow, her small hands digging into the fabric, her screams forming words if you listened close enough. Not random sounds of terror. Specific words. Help me. Get it out. Please. Sarah made a decision that would later get her called into the hospital administrator's office for a formal review. She took the pillow from the girl's hands, ignoring the protocols about not removing patient comfort items, and carried it to the nurse's station. Under the fluorescent lights, she examined every inch of the fabric. Standard hospital issue. White cotton. Machine washable. Nothing unusual, except for a small section along the bottom seam that had been hand-stitched with thread that didn't quite match. Someone had opened this pillow and sewn it back up. The scissors felt heavy in her hand as she cut through the stitching. The fabric parted easily, and what slid out onto the counter made her stomach drop. A cell phone. Old model. Flip style. The kind you could pick up at any convenience store with prepaid minutes. She powered it on with shaking hands. Expected to be locked, but opened right to the message screen. 53 unread texts, all from the same number. All time-stamped over the past 6 months. All signed the same way. Damage. Possible vascular compromise. He didn't make a sound. Didn't complain. Just stared at the ceiling with the kind of control that made everyone in the room feel like amateurs. The attending moved in, but the SEAL officer held up a hand. I need a vascular surgeon, and I need someone who's worked blast injuries before. The attending stammered. We've got a trauma surgeon on call, but I didn't ask for a trauma surgeon. I asked for someone who knows what they're doing. The room went silent. Diane glanced at the resident. The resident looked at the attending, and the limping nurse, who'd been standing near the supply cart, stepped forward again. This time, the SEAL officer's eyes tracked her, really looked at her. His gaze dropped to her leg, to the way she moved, then back to her face. And something flickered there. Recognition. Or maybe just curiosity. She didn't wait for permission. She moved aside, gloved hands already assessing the wound. I'm going to check for vascular compromise. This is going to hurt. The officer didn't flinch. Do it. She pressed down, firm and deliberate, checking pulses, feeling for warmth, watching his face for signs of nerve damage. Her movements were textbook, but it was the way she did it. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Like she'd done this in the back of a helicopter while it was taking fire. That made the officer's expression shift. He watched her work, and then quietly he asked, "Where do you serve?" The room froze. Diane's head snapped up. The resident stopped mid-motion. The attending turned around. The limping nurse didn't look up. She just kept working, her voice steady. I didn't. The officer's eyes narrowed. Bullshit. She finished her assessment and finally met his gaze. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. And then the officer said, "You're too good. You move like you've been downrange." She didn't answer. She just stood up, stripped off her gloves, and turned to grab a suture kit. But the officer wasn't done. He looked past her at the 2 Navy officers standing near the door. One of them stepped forward, a captain, his uniform crisp and decorated. He'd been watching the whole time, and now he was staring at the limping nurse like he'd seen a ghost. The captain took a step closer, then another. His eyes scanned her face, her posture, the way she held herself. And then he stopped. His hand came up in a slow, deliberate salute. Sharp, formal, the kind of salute you give to someone who outranks you, or someone you owe your life to. The ER went dead silent. Every eye in the room turned. Diane's mouth fell open. The resident froze. The attending looked like he'd been hit with a stun gun, and the limping nurse stood there, perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she returned the salute, not like a nurse, like a soldier, like someone who'd done it 10,000 times before. The captain's voice was rough. Lieutenant Commander Hayes. The attending's face went white. Diane actually took a step back. The younger nurse whispered, "Oh my God." The SEAL officer on the table grinned through the pain. I knew it. The limping nurse, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, dropped her hand and turned back to the patient like nothing had happened. But the room had already shifted. The attending was stammering an apology. Diane looked like she wanted to disappear. The resident couldn't even make eye contact. And the younger nurse was staring at her like she'd just witnessed a magic trick. The captain cleared his throat. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was a combat medic with SEAL Team 3. 2 tours in Afghanistan. She pulled 13 men out of a firefight after taking shrapnel to her leg. She stayed on the line for 6 hours. Refused evac until every single one of her guys was stable. He paused. She saved my life. Twice. The officer on the table looked up at her. Why the hell are you working in a civilian ER? Hayes didn't look at him. She just threaded the suture needle and said flatly, because I got tired of watching people die who didn't have to. The room stayed silent. No one knew what to say. No one knew how to process it. This quiet, limping nurse who they dismissed, who they whispered about, who they'd assumed couldn't handle the pace. She wasn't just competent. She was a war hero, a decorated combat medic who'd operated under fire and saved lives when most people would have frozen or run. And she'd been here the whole time, doing the work, taking the disrespect, and never once saying a word. Diane finally found her voice. I didn't know. Hayes glanced at her. You didn't ask. That landed like a slap. Diane looked down. The attending rubbed his face. The resident just stood there, staring. And the younger nurse, the one who'd been watching Hayes all night, stepped a little closer. Why didn't you tell us? Hayes tied off the suture and checked the officer's vitals. Because it doesn't matter. The work matters. The patient matters. The rest is just noise. The captain nodded. That sounds like her. The officer on the table grinned again. Damn right. By the time the shift ended, word had spread through the entire ER. The quiet nurse with the limp wasn't just a nurse. She was a legend. The kind of person other people told stories about. And every single staff member who'd doubted her, who'd whispered, who'd assumed she didn't belong, they all had to sit with that. Some apologized. Some didn't. Hayes didn't seem to care either way. She clocked out, limped her car, and drove home like it was just another Tuesday. But the younger nurse caught her in the parking lot. Hey, I wanted to say I'm sorry for not seeing you. Hayes looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded. You see me now. That's what matters. And she got in her car and left. No speech. No lesson. Just a quiet understanding that respect isn't given because of title or uniform. It's earned. And sometimes the people who've earned it the most are the ones who never asked for it. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what you would have said if you were in that room. And if you want more stories about people who prove that strength isn't loud, it's quiet, subscribe, because there are a lot more where this came from.